Today's guest is Samir Sharma, a global strategy leader and a CEO of datazuum, a consultancy that helps organizations turn data and AI into real business value. Samir is also the host of the Data Strategy Show, a podcast exploring how data strategy drives business advantage. But today's special, we are here to talk about his new book, The Strategy Canvas, a field guide for data and AI. There you go, Ken. Welcome to the show.
Great. Thank you, Arvind. It's a pleasure to be on the show and really good to be speaking to you. The biggest lesson I was taught back in 2002, everything has to be outcome related. Even whatever you're doing, the number has to be either a cost saving or a money making number.
That was the origin story of your canvas, basically.
Well, actually, that's not the origin story of my canvas. That was the origin story of understanding value.
Okay.
The origin story of my canvas is very different. In 2014, I created datazuum in 2013. And in 2014, I landed my first major client. And it was itty bitty old me because that's all datazuum was at the time. And I walked into, there was a large postal and logistics firm in the UK. And the first day I was there, I remember walking in, I got my, desk. They said, here we go. This is your area, and here's the kind of meetings you've got for today to understand everything. I said, great. And I walked into one meeting, which was titled something like architecture. Okay. And I thought, okay, so this is going to be architecture, whether it's enterprise architecture or data architecture, but it was for me to get an understanding of the lay of the land. What had they put in terms of the architecture? What had they progressed in? Where were they on the journey? Because they also had lots of different suppliers. And I was brought in to do back then what was termed as a data and BI strategy.
Okay.
Right. So I walk into this room and on one side, there's a whole bunch of, there's enterprise architect, there's IT people, there's a data architect. And on the other side, there's the operational and commercial teams. Yeah, and it's basically, there's a projector, and it's projecting this massive data model. Yeah. And you had to squint, you had to put your glasses on to see, what was going on. And I thought, hang on, this is crazy. So at one point, one of the operational, it was one of the commercial execs got up and said, sorry, I don't get any of this. Just give us the data and we'll do what we want to do with it. And I thought, oh, there we go. That's where it's going to end up, right? Because the IT data tech guys don't speak the language of the business. The business, and operational guys don't speak the language of the tech and data, etc. So I said, look, stop. And that was quite bold because it was my first day. I said, let's abandon this meeting, And so I literally walked out of there sweating, thinking, oh my God, what have I done? And I booked a room for the afternoon because I thought, right, now I really have to come back with the goods.
Yeah.
And I, they had floor to ceiling, whiteboards. And I literally just went on and I started what emerged was this canvas. And then we're going to understand what products we can build. And then we're going to look at what the data is that we need to build that stuff and answer those questions and arrive at that North Star. And that North Star is linked to our business strategy. And it was as simple as that. And they got it like that. I thought, whoa, I must be onto something. So that's the kind of origin story. I mean, it was a lot more than that because then I spent 3 months actually going around educating people and talking about this canvas, which I didn't call it a canvas at that time. I called it a decision map because it was really around, with the business questions, what's the decision and action you want to take? And so that then gave it the sort of formal link up to that business strategy, which you could then say, if I do this, it's going to help me do X and it's going to achieve that strategic objective that I wanted to do. And I could have a decision map saying, if I took these 3 steps, well, one would lead to this, one would lead to that, and the other one. So I now have a way to navigate and take which one I'd like to do and what actions are hinged off those. So yes, that's how this came about.
By the way,
that's how the canvas came about. Yeah.
For 2006, my first job was a data analyst in a data warehouse with this humongous retail organization. They had 3,000 tables. And my job is exactly what you said. Huge canvas. You have to squint your eyes to look at the data model. So I am that guy sitting with a business showing data model.
No one could understand it. They didn't even introduce it. It's like, this is the data model.
Well, thankfully there was no Samir who said, let's stop, let's walk away. There was me who's saying, I don't think this is the right meeting for me to share the screen. So same projector, same setting, extremely difficult model. But I was the guy who said, let's walk away. But I didn't have a canvas then. What came out of the meeting was me building something called a conceptual data model, which is a very
high level. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, don't insult me anymore. All right.
So, I talk about that origin story in the book, because that is where it came from.
All right. So I want to get into the book a little bit because this is the book launch party. Look, before I go there,
I should have a streamer.
There you go. But tell me this: why now? Is something triggering you to make this a little bit more formal in a book? Is it the AI revolution? Why? What are the three things you think about, Samir, when you launch this book?
So I think the trigger was the adaptation and the iteration of the canvas. This canvas has been through about 24 or 25 iterations, if not more. But I probably haven't documented the ones that I didn't document. And through that, in 2018, I tried to write a book in the same way, but I didn't feel like it was there. There was something missing. Something missing in terms of, I don't think in 2018 people were ready for it. And there just wasn't a catalyst. In 2018, everybody was technology motivated, right? The other thing is, I always come back to this idea of how on earth do we speak to each other in a way that is a similar language? Because I'll often walk into many businesses and it's buzzword bingo. So the other thing is, why should a small team like a data team, if there's 30 people, for example, and the organization is maybe 600, why should they go out and talk about data and train everybody else up in data? And to a point where, it's not effective. I just switched it around. Why don't you train the 30 people on business? It's quicker, it's faster, and then that's a much easier play. So I think language has got something to do with it. And then the third thing I would say is the value piece. Because that lesson I got taught way back in 2002 is something that's been plaguing me for a long time with many organizations that I've worked with. And I think that whole value piece, and it's being talked about a lot now, but I still think that I believe, because of the experiences I have and because of the organizations I walk into, people are still doing it wrong. So the book came about at a pivotal moment, because again, I tried to do it in 2022, just in the sort of pandemic world, view, and it still wasn't right. But when AI then accelerated, and I modified the canvas, and it looks very different now to what it did in 2022. I realized that this was the canvas that was right to be documented, right to be out there, and something that will stand the test of time for the next probably 10 years.
I see.
I wasn't so... I had to explain it a lot, but with this,
not satisfied with the outcome.
Exactly. And now the explanation, when you read it, it's pragmatic, it's simple. As you know, I know you read it, and thank you very much for reviewing it, because you are one of my reviewers and you did a great job. And you said to me, I could read it like that, and it was really simple. And I wanted to do something without the buzzword bingo in it as well.
So I'll tell you the one thing to add to what you said, right? So for me, I've done a lot of data strategy, but there are two things that I kind of felt the book gave me, right? One is a structure.
Yes.
So the assembly from value to data to technology to implementation, right? Which we'll cover but essentially, I've always done it, but I've never really sat back and thought about how I've done it. So the book kind of gave me the structure that here's how in the sequence you do it. That's number one. And I think you kept using this word language. Right?
Yes.
I think it's very important we all have a common language, especially for strategy, because every company does differently. But if you take the root of it, like the first principles, they're always the same.
They are. And let me just add,
you did a great job in assembling. That's what made my life
Yeah. And most people who read it now have given me that feedback.
Yeah.
And they've said that you're right about the structure, and it's probably something that I would have said. The fourth thing, which should have been really the first thing, is what I term as closing that strategy execution gap. And I think that's the other thing that I've seen. Many people can have a wonderfully nice glossy strategy which has got 16 pillars in it, and they all look shiny and new and whatever, but actually they can't implement it. And I think that practical, the practical sense is what you need in a strategy. You don't need something that's onerous and difficult, and you need some pivotal questions. And basically the way that I've written it is to do that. So it forces people to think about how are they going to execute it, rather than coming up with this perfect strategy. Because I don't think you need the perfect strategy. I really don't think that. And actually, you probably see it from my post today that I did on LinkedIn, because you commented.
Absolutely.
You need to just get going. And actually, if you've got fundamental questions, you can go quick. You don't need to, we've got to get that right. That definition doesn't look right to me, or that word doesn't look right. Come on, stop obsessing. Just, start to deliver value
now
quickly.
even AI is jumpstarting that agility now, right? Because It doesn't take 100 weeks to go implement MDM now. It
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
So very practical, very pragmatic ways. Let's start going through these steps. first, right?
Sure.
So I'll start with the North Star because that's how you start the book. So give me some examples of how you go into a room of a big Fortune 500 company and you're the guy who's designing the strategy. How do you uncover North Star? What are some of the things you've seen?
So this is what I'm looking for, right?
Okay.
And I think this is where I've walked into those rooms and I've asked the question, in your business strategy or in your corporate strategy or whatever document that you've got, how do you spell out what you want to achieve as a business? What I'm looking for is I'm not looking for a blank statement, or a blanket statement, I should say, which
I want to solve world hunger is a blanket statement.
Yeah. Or we want to grow revenue. Well, that's great. Every company wants to do that, right? But tell me, what do you want to do it in, and by what percentage, and by what timeline? So I'm just looking for specific. We want to increase our revenue by 5% by 2027. That's a great lever for me because I'm thinking, okay, so how can I then start to think about that North Star, those strategic objectives, which I then need to grab? And it could be we need to cut costs by X% by so and so. We need to,
we need to oblige by regulatory compliance of CCPA Act that's coming up.
Or we need to increase our customer satisfaction from 60% to 75%. And so those are great levers to actually have right there. And many times, lots of companies can't tell you that. They can't be that specific. And I think that's something. There are very few. I mean, obviously, some of those bigger companies will have those specific strategic objectives. But what I say in the book is, look, map them out like this. You've got to have those quantified. You've got to understand why you're putting a strategy together and how you're then going to be able to use data and AI to help enable that strategy. And so I'm always looking for that. That's what I'm really looking for.
There's a gentleman that actually came to my podcast recently, and he's well known for strategy just like you. And he does this yearly survey. In one of his questions, he asked offensive versus defensive strategy. Back to the North Star. Apparently, and I'm just looking at my notes, 80% of the people are still not clear what their North Star goals are. They're clear on the bigger, broader world hunger kind of goals, but they're still not narrow enough to solve a particular problem. Even the existence of AI, right? They're still after shiny new toys.
80%. That's insane. That's crazy.
So, okay, I've now defined the North Star. I now have a tactical problem I want to solve, or I know what to solve. Let's go into
what I term as strategic framing. And that's where you start to build out, if I've got those strategic objectives, what are the use cases that are going to underpin those things? And with that, what decisions must be enabled for me to drive out those business outcomes? So that's one part of it. And basically, if I say, I've got a set of use cases, well, how am I going to deliver that? So those tools are being used daily. So why I say advanced analytics, I must remind people that it's just not about Gen AI. There's other tools that, and so what we want to do is to say pragmatically, we're not going to not every nail we're going to find will need to be, or whatever the adage is, I can't remember now, my brain's gone, but we've got to put the right tool, we've got to put the right solution to that particular use case. And the final thing in that area, in the strategic framing area, is value measures. So ROI, cost benefit, or however, companies will put a business case, an investment case together. And it's all about how do we track and communicate value and what metrics matter in that. So things like EBITDA and revenue and so on. Those are the kinds of things that we need to pick up as data teams to really essentially structure our work around. And so that really gives us the framing. So it takes us from the North Star, then it says, how are we going to deliver those things? What are the kinds of capabilities that we need to drive those, and whether those what solutions those are? But actually, if we are going to do that, are we going to spend tons of money on this? And if we are, what is the benefit and the ROI? And then that also brings us to the whole prioritization effect, because once we've got that, we can start to prioritize. Well, this solution isn't actually going to give us what we thought it would, in terms of that revenue return, or so why should we have that at number one? Actually, we've got these small bits here which will give us much bigger returns. So let's start to reprioritize that whole thing based on what we know. But we are going to get into another prioritization in a minute. So
jump into that. This is where you're slowly moving to the tactical side.
Because while we've got everything on the table in terms of, we've got a solution to what that use case is, but we haven't gone and checked, do we have things like the data? And who's going to be using it? Is it internal consumers, external consumers? Do we have the technology and systems to run this stuff or not? And that gives us the enablement question. Can we do this stuff? Can we deliver it? So it gives us a bit of the practical realities of what we can and can't do, basically. And that's where we do a reprioritization of what we can and can't do, because we know, do we have the data? Is it available? Is it structured well? Can it deliver on what we want it to do? If we can't, is there going to be a system that we're going to be putting in place that we can get that data? Does that mean we have to reorder the use cases that we'd already got? And by the way, with assets, let's reuse stuff as we go along, because it's cheaper. It's more effective. It's quicker.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've got it.
And it already exists, so it's easier to onboard an asset that already exists. All right. So we started with the North Star. We went into the strategic frame. We did the enablement. Now we've assessed the capabilities. We've assessed the reusability. Right?
And I think no, you got that. And I think part of the framing to the enablement is closing that strategy execution gap, because then you really see the reality of what you can and can't do.
Right.
And then it's into the readiness factor. It's the strategic readiness. That's the final layer, which you talked about earlier, which is the portfolio management. Is okay. Now we know what we want to do. Now we know what we can do given what we've got and all of the challenges that we might have with some of our systems or technology. But we're going to now put it back into the wider frame of, we've got a ton of transformation and change happening across our business. How do we integrate all of this stuff?
Right.
That's when we start to think about, how does this all link in with the wider business strategy and initiatives that are already going on? So we're not doing this again in isolation. We're not doing this as a project that's going to sit on the shelf somewhere. We're making sure that it's going back into the fabric of what. And also, I think the other aspect is that many people don't necessarily see that full wide view, because they are so focused on what they're doing. But actually, what we bring then is and let's just take the blinders away and let's look at this thing. Because if we are, guess what? We're doing this thing over here, but somebody's doing something similar over there. Why are they doing that? Or actually, why are we doing this?
Exactly.
And can we leverage that bit over there that's already started?
The reusability, like you said.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's like, so let's actually bring that together. And actually, their scope might be different.
Yep.
And so what we're doing is either bolting it on, or they're coming in and saying, actually, why don't we use this as a if we're going to build an MVP or something out of this, let's actually come together so that we can save money and do it quicker and accelerate the development or whatever we're planning to do. So I think that gives it that enterprise-wide context.
So this is fantastic. I'm actually trying to form a story consistently so the audience can understand it. North Star, strategic framing, enablement, and then the readiness, which is basically the prioritization and portfolio management.
And then there's two more components in the readiness area.
Op models and gov.
Yes. So now you've talked about how do we do this stuff and how do we deliver it. But we need to talk about what the delivery mechanism is going to look like.
Got it. Yep.
So who owns what, and how will this stuff run sustainably, ethically, and at scale?
Yep.
And that's where we then start to map out what that operating model is, because most organizations miss that. They will not look at an operating model view, because I think it's something, the way I look at the operating model is the operating model actually makes your strategy real. Simple as that. So again, you're closing that gap quicker.
Yeah.
In order to facilitate, how is this going to work? Who's going to do it? What are the decisions we need to make and take in terms of that governance? So operating model and governance come together. What does the organization look like in order to deliver this stuff? And do we have a lack of capability somewhere? And if we do, we need to work out what we're going to do about that. And so you set this up in a way that you've done all that pre-work with the framing, the enablement, North Star, etc. And now you're just saying, this is how we're going to roll it out. This is what we need in order to deliver it.
But
and then
is there a dynamic relationship between the operating model, which is the delivery mechanism, and the portfolio readiness?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They go hand in hand. The portfolio management bit is really just for us to make sure that we are playing in the right mode with everything else that is going on in the business.
Yes.
Because one thing I've seen is the fact that we have change fatigue in lots of businesses. So that fatigue is there because there's so much being thrown at individuals, and it's coming from right and left field, that no one is actually making sure that if we combine some of this stuff together, we wouldn't have to have 16 projects, we might have to have 8.
Right.
And therefore, we are looking at consolidating that, but we're also looking at how we then use our resources more effectively instead of it being reactive and whatever. And poor Johnny has got 20 things to do that he would burn out within a couple of months. So I think it's just being cognizant of that. The operating model then extends that, and it says, okay, we've now come to a really good point, but the operating model is actually that whole execution piece.
Yeah.
And so that takes it one step further into how are we going to work as a business together, and how do we execute in the best way, and how do data data teams and AI teams, or, tech teams and business teams, how do they work together in a way that is coming together rather than, like I said earlier, you want to talk about a physical model, that's not going to work. So we've got to work within this context of plain English and actually framing it around an engagement framework, which is how we're going to deliver and work together.
Now, set of deliverables that you have defined and deliver so that none of this goes out, just as a conversation between you and me. It has to be defined somewhere. And it has to be kept track of, right?
There are a set of templates that come with each of these particular areas. And, just going to value measures, that value measures is going to have a cost benefit analysis, right? That's going to be that kind of template. Use cases, I've given a very structured use case template in the book. So there's lots of things that I've guided people through. And so that helps them actually visualize and understand how those components come together. And actually in the book also, which I think you like, chapter 5 has got a comprehensive example. Which
I generally liked all the tables you put together because it gives me a very tactical frame of mind, for lack of a better word, right? Even at the very last chapter where you actually had the actual canvas, the living canvas, I think is what you called it. There's a very, again, I keep using this word structure. There's a very specific structure. And then within each one of these, there's a set of deliverables that you've kind of pointed out, which is what I like the most.
And what I've done is I've also provided a checklist. For each of the framing, enablement, and readiness sections, the strategic checklist, there's a hints and tips about what you need to do. There are templates, and in that chapter 5 where I bring it all together, it's actually I've completed one of the canvases for the reader.
Risk and ethics.
Yes.
So I want to jump in there. That's the piece a lot of people oversee or understand. You've covered that quite a bit in the book. Why? What's so important about risk and ethics?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here. One is the whole AI landscape is emerging very quickly. And therefore what tends to happen is that regulation is very slow. And even if regulation isn't there, I think as companies, we have a moral duty to really look at what we're building, whether we're building is safe, it's ethical, it will protect the consumer out there, but it will also, protect our reputation. And are we making sure that we are understanding what kind of biases are in the data that we have? So I think it's important, and that's why I keep it at the end, not as an afterthought, as the part of the cornerstone of this, because as AI accelerates and we do more stuff, undoubtedly, we've got things like the EU AI Act here, which is going to, be quite
the GDPR, CCPA.
Yeah, exactly, CCPA. That's right. So those things, but again, people will lobby against that. And so I think it's just for one of those things to say, look, you might be doing this stuff for great purposes, but think of AI for good as well. And that's something that we really need to embed in this process. So it was one of those things that I'm fairly passionate about. And I think one of the outputs of that I speak a lot about to people is a whole idea around AI governance. And that is the part of it, which again is not being played into the workspace or the corporate environment as much as we probably like it to be.
So, no, fantastic. Thank you. I really, really appreciate it. I do want to kind of summarize for my listeners what this looks like. I've read it and I don't want to be biased, but at the same time, I got to tell you again and again, from my perspective, I use it every single day. This is my reference essentially, it's a method to the madness, right? Running for different things every day. I think we got to take a step back. I never did. Fortunately, you did. And you kind of looked at it going, oh, maybe what I'm doing is a repeatable framework that I got to write about. So if I understand this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I will start with the North Star, which will give me big tactical goals for the organization. I'll then go into the strategic framing, which will essentially help me understand what I've got, what are the things I need to do to kind of get those North Star goals. I will go into the enablement, which will help me understand capabilities of what I've got, what I need to get, what are the business technology data enablers that I need to. I will then wrap it up with my readiness assessment, which is prioritization, portfolio management. Do I have all the right pieces to deliver this North Star? So those are the 4 pieces, which is going to be now kind of put together in a box with the operating model, which will essentially help me understand what are the delivery mechanisms, what is already existing, could I integrate with what exists, do I need to do this separate thing over there, and what's the return on investment, right? Cost benefit analysis. And then last but not the least, all 5 has to be looked at the lens of risk and ethics, because now without that, I'm at the risk of brand reputation, biases, decays, whatever those things are. AI is just accelerating this confusion.
it will be.
Absolutely. So this is a very structured process.
Yes.
People are inherently biased towards whatever they do. So I feel even though you've provided them a structure, culture could be a barrier.
Yes.
How do you see the executives that you work with beyond that cultural barrier and help them use this structure that they can execute and build something out of?
So one of the other things that I talk about in the book is around culture and change management. And so
culture eats strategy for breakfast. Isn't that what they say?
Yes, I was on a panel yesterday or the day before, and somebody said, for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and and they'll gobble everything up. But so I think that is something again that needs to be taken into consideration by these CXOs and their minus ones, because having a pulse on the culture and the change piece around organizations is really key to this. So this is not just we're going to train some people on how to use Excel, because that's never going to shift it. This is a real
behavior.
So this is a real philosophical thing that one needs to take into consideration. And that philosophical is not just saying, should we opine on this for months on end? This is actually making very practical recommendations to how you're going to embed this into the current culture, into the narrative. And there are many ways to do that, looking at power structures, looking at rites and rituals, looking at the stories that people tell across the organization, because that is where those things make or break. You and I know, and I'll shut up in a second, that if we look again back at all of the narrative that have come out from all of the analysts and reports that we've read, between 70 and 85% of these transformations fail. So why does it keep happening? And it's normally because of that whole change in culture piece.
100%. So keep in mind, there are a couple of things that comes to my mind. Doing AI now, a lot of the agentic AI implementation, one of the biggest hurdle for us to productionize these agents are the people.
Yes.
People are fearful of their jobs.
Of course.
And that is a fundamental cultural aspect we're trying to change. Now, in some cases, they should genuinely be nervous, right? And to your point, what value are they adding to the organization? And how can they coexist, collaborate, and be the master of AI, as an example, is what we teach in culture, right?
Yeah. Again, I think they've got to come together. Yeah, they've got to come together, because I think you can't really do a complete bottom-up change.
Yes.
There's got to be that oversight from the executives, and they've got to have that drive to actually say, this is what we're going to mandate, and therefore you can bring it. And I think change coming that way is actually going to be more effective, because you are enabling change quicker at the bottom, in the bottom up, and you're actually, what you're doing is you're being more tactile. You're working with people to understand who they are and how they tick and what they do every day. And therefore, when you do introduce a new technology, you're then not surprised when they say, oh my God, this is terrible. Now what am I going to do? But actually, what we're trying to do here is to say we are focused on the real change. We're focused on and the executives have to lead by example. So it's a term that's used a lot. But I also think that what we need to do I think leaders, and I was on a panel 2 days ago, I think leaders need to really have compassion in their language. And I think this is something that we don't see enough of, compassion and empathy. And therefore, when we're trying to build out these new possibilities, these new future models and business models, it's all very tactical. But there's a reminder that this workforce is the one that's going to be hit by all of this stuff. And therefore, we've got to use, instead of saying that everybody's always resistant to change, we've got to stop that narrative. We've really got to say, oh gosh, that's an excuse. And I think that excuse is what most people have used for many, many years. Oh, we can't do this because everybody's going to be resistant to change. We change every day.
Right.
Regardless of if we really think about, if we do it out of, habit. And so therefore I think we need to change the language. We need to think about that empathetic feeling, because agents are going to be accelerating, no doubt, and people are talking about an agentic enterprise, and they're talking about lots of different things. But actually, when you think about it, who are the strategic assets in your business? Right.
Yes.
It isn't an agent, because an agent is just going to form part of your workforce. So it's really disheartening when we do that to this narrative about the fear factor that we put into people. I think it's terrible what the industry is doing in that sense, and that narrative needs to stop.
See, that there are macro factors that are way beyond you and I that are also adding fuel to the fire.
I agree.
Every conference in the last 4 weeks, the primary focus of the conference is agents, AI agents. Right?
Yes.
Not the people.
Yeah.
I think there were hardly any part of this conference that talked about what should people do in order to look at this future, right?
Yeah.
There was very little focus on that. it was all about technology. Wow, saving money, making money, all of those things. So the part of this is also the macro factor, and then of course the political climate. How at a bigger level that we don't have control over, right? So
I think most people are in AI panic mode right now, and that isn't going to last forever, because I think there'll be a big correction. And I think what in my view practical compassion is: here's what changes, here's what doesn't, and here's why it matters. And I think that's something that we really need to spell out, and that's not being spelt out. And I think if you're going to go down this route of an agent is going to take on everything, listen, agents have flaws, right? An agent that's going off to do one specific task, and then suddenly the rules in that task don't match, and then it goes off and does its own thing and comes back with a result that you weren't expecting. Well, what happened?
Oh yeah.
So you've got to really think. This is about capability building. Yep. This is capabilities in every single way. We are building the capabilities for a future model, but we're not trying to get rid of humans. And I think, I won't say much more about it, but I think a compassionate leader they don't eliminate the fear, right? And it's an odd thing for me to say, but they give people the confidence to actually walk through that fear. Yeah. And that's the compassion that we need. And there isn't
well said, Samir. Really well said. Excellent. Samir, where can people find your book?
On Amazon. It's available on Amazon, on every marketplace so far. So yes, you can buy it on Amazon, you can get it on the Kindle, and it's available now.
For all my listeners, I will put a link for the Amazon how to purchase the book. Samir, it's always a pleasure to have you in my podcast. Thank you so much for doing this book launch with me. I'm really honored.
Hey, my first book launch.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I hope many more to come. Wish you good luck, and hope to see this as a bestseller very soon.
Thank you very much. And it's been great speaking to you, and thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Samir. Appreciate it.